Hey, Beverly, your name is,
Beverly Croskery.
and what years were you and your husband here at YDS?
We came here in 1955 in September, and Bob graduated in 1959. And the first year we did live here. The other 3 years he did a student ministry in Greenwich, Connecticut.
Where was the married student housing then?
The marriage?
The married student housing?
Well, we did not live in the married
Okay.
student housing. We lived on Dixwell Avenue, across the street from the Winchester gun factory. I mean, it was right in that area, in a small apartment with our baby, who was 4 months old when we came, because we had our first baby as we left Oklahoma. So,
What were some of the challenges you felt as a spouse while your husband was in Divinity School?
well, actually, I just wanted to help him, in any way I could. I did have to, we had left Phillips University, where he graduated when he came here, and I had only finished my first 3 years of college, so of course I had to put that aside for a short time. But I knew that we were going to have to find a way to make a living as well. He had a good scholarship here, but we needed to put us together a budget and decide what I could do, so I decided to find a job. So I did teach at Hamden Hall Country Day School. I taught 5th grade there for that first year. And in fact, he taught as well for part-time.
Okay, so
Yeah, there's something on the background, I'm just gonna take it off. I'm actually a Hamden Hall alum.
Ah,
Oh, actually, my boyfriend from New Haven, his sisters went there.
oh, I have lots of wonderful stories about Hamden Hall Country Day School.
Yeah. Oh, they loved it.
Right.
Down here?
Yeah, that's it.
I'm glad it's still in business. Maybe we should drive by and look.
Yeah, it's just up the
I
street.
just
Mhm.
skipped the street. Did you have any experience of life on campus? Did you come to campus activities?
We came when we could. We had several of our other friends from Phillips University who were also here, and so they lived in the housing here. But, of course, we only lived that first year, and then Bob got the offer to go to this school, this wonderful church in Greenwich, Connecticut, in the back country of Greenwich. This beautiful church was built in the 1700s and still had the original horse sheds there. Church that had also had a pastor called Jonathan Edwards.
Oh, no.
So Bob's name is out on that list in Greenwich along with Jonathan Edwards. But we lived in the parsonage right next door to that little church. And so Bob, of course, came to Yale 3 days a week, and 2 days a week he was home working on pastoral care, which was interesting in Greenwich, Connecticut. We grew up in Oklahoma, and Greenwich was a little different than Oklahoma City and Tulsa, where we had grown up.
Did you make friends among the other clergy-wise here or student-wise?
Not as much as I would like, although I did make some. At that time, when you were in Divinity School, because they were mostly men, I mean, there weren't many women unless they were in Christian education, but they had a program for the wives, and we could come, and I can't remember if it was once a week or once a month, I can't remember, but my friend Armida Holmes and I would drive in, and the men were in charge of our children then, because I'd already had another one soon after we moved to Greenwich. And we would drive here, and we would have the professors teach us in a nutshell what our husbands were supposed to learn. And I had been a Christian education major before that. Before that, I'd been a theater major, but then I'd switched to Christian education when I came to Phillips. So, and I still remember Dr. Calhoun told me once, which I thought was a wonderful story. Lots of wives came, so we did have tea together and had a wonderful time. But one of us asked a question, and he said, I love it when one of you asks a question because it's because you want to know the answer. He says, when your husband asks a question, they just want to show me how much they know, which I thought was a pretty good answer. So, but Armida and I became friends, and in fact, we would sometimes babysit for each other so we could get away for a weekend. And so at that time, I had two and was pregnant again, and they had two children. And so I remember we went to the grocery store once with all of these children, and everybody gave us these dirty looks like, don't they know anything about birth control or something? But we did love, loved our time in Greenwich, and we met, famous people. Jimmy Dean came to our little church, and Bert Parks became a friend, and then, people who were the big bankers in New York City who never saw their families until, when, except in the summertime, because they went to work in the dark and came home in the dark. But it was a very interesting experience, and they treated us like royalty. They seemed to love their little family, that we had. We had our second child was born the second week we were in Greenwich, but he brought me back to New Haven. And something really wonderful happened then. Bob could only take me, but he had to go back and take care of our first child, Ricky. A church member was just holding down the fort. And Dr. Mastriani, who became a very famous obstetrician, was to deliver the baby. And he said, well, isn't your husband here? And I said, no, Dr. Mastriani, my husband had to go back to take care of our first son. And he said, then I will stay with you. And Dr. Mastriani stayed with me that full night. He left for a few minutes here and there and was with me until the baby was born. I thought that was one of the nicest things that happened to me at Grace New Haven Hospital.
That is wonderful. That is.
Sorry, one other interruption. The bracelet on your hand, or it's your watch, every time. Yeah, I wonder if you take it off. It just keeps hitting, and we're picking that up.
I love that story, Beverly. Are there any other memories you have of being a clergy spouse, a student wife here that would sum up the time of y'all's relationship with YDS?
Well, in some ways I felt, because so many of our other friends at Phillips who had come here, in fact, there were several divinity students from Phillips, I was close to all of them. And in fact, because we had a house, and I had 21 for the first Thanksgiving dinner I ever cooked. But one of our parishioners owned a turkey farm, and she said, I'd like to buy your turkey. And I said, but I'm going to have 21 people. And she said, then you will need a very large turkey. So the first turkey I ever cooked weighed 32 pounds. Turned out beautifully. Yeah. But all of our Phillips friends who were there came, but all of them lived in New Haven except us. So the only time we ever really lived in New Haven was that first year.
Is there anything else you want to share with us about those years here?
Well, would you like a really funny story?
Oh, yeah.
Well, we were very poor, of course. In fact, our budget was $7.50 a week for food, because at Hamden Hall Country Day we got to eat our lunch, and both of us were teaching there. So we made sure we had at least one good meal a day there. But they had lobster on sale at the A&P. And so we decided to splurge and buy this lobster. And so we took this lobster home. This is when we were on Dixwell Avenue. And I got this. It was a huge lobster. Now, I'd never cooked a lobster before. Remember, I'm 20 years old. And I said, what am I going to cook this lobster in? I knew I just had to boil it in something. I looked all around, and finally I said, I know. Ricky's diaper pail. So I went in and poured all the diapers in the bathtub and scrubbed that big pot that I had. And I cooked that lobster, and it was perfect. And we were eating out on our little tiny balcony we had, and Bob said, oh, this is wonderful, Beverly. By the way, what did you finally cook it in? And I said, Ricky's diaper pail. So that's one of my favorite stories about life when you're young and poor, and of course Bob was studying all the time. He was teaching part-time. He taught 9th grade English and 8th grade science at Hamden Hall, and I taught 5th grade. And but it was a wonderful time of our lives. And then when he graduated, Vincent Daniels, who was on the board, I think, at Yale at that time, took a liking to Bob. He really, really liked him. And he was the minister of the First Congregational Church in Old Greenwich. And he invited Bob to come and be his associate for the year after Bob graduated. And of course, he loved Yale and was here a lot, Vince Daniels was. So we moved to Old Greenwich and lived in a huge Victorian house. And our little girl, Katie, was born when we were still in Greenwich, but our baby, Virginia, was born when we were living in Old Greenwich. And that was, in fact, we left for Wichita, Kansas that next year when she was 4 weeks old.
Well, thank you, Beverly. I am so glad I found you so we could get this interview and hear from some of the spouses.
But it was a wonderful time, and thank you very much as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.